All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Lunch with Lincoln for Monday, October 10th, 2022. I am Reed Galen, your host for today. My guest is the one and only Tom Nichols, author of The Death of Expertise, amongst others, a longtime professor at the Naval War College in Rhode Island, where he is coming to us today. Also an expert on the Soviet Union and subsequent Russia. So, Tom, I want to thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Reed.
All right, so um, there has been a significant uptake in activity, I guess. Maybe it's been going on, but maybe it's just now hitting our shores more dramatically, Tom, in Ukraine. Over the weekend, somebody, we assume the Ukrainians, I guess, attacked the Kerch Bridge that connects mainland Russia to the Crimea in dramatic fashion. Both the rail bridge and the road bridge were attacked and looked like they were pretty significantly damaged. In retaliation for that, over the course of the weekend, and probably as we speak, the Russians have launched cruise missiles into residential areas, into the city center of Kyiv and other places, which seems to be a return to their idea of if we can't have it, you can't either kind of ethos from, maybe earlier in the war. So for our folks who do not have the level of expertise you do in this, give us a sense of what this last, say, 48 to 72 hours means for the conflict over there.
Well, the Russians have just decided that as they, and I think this goes back to the beginning of the war, that acts of resistance from the Ukrainians must be punished with murder. I should say, by the way, I'm no longer at the Naval War College. I've retired from there, so I'm now a writer at the Atlantic. I think that the attack on the Kerch Bridge was humiliating. Happened on Putin's birthday, so it had some. I won't say it's a strategic game changer. It had some effect on Russia's ability to supply its forces, but it's humiliating. This is the army that once was supposed to be the second most powerful army in the world, regularly getting pasted by a country a third its size. And so the answer to that has been that the Russians will just engage in murder and just, the civilian reprisals. These, to me, look like war crimes, directly, intentionally targeting civilians as reprisals. But we shouldn't be that surprised. That's what the Russians have been doing since this offensive started falling apart in the first week. And I think people always need to remember, Putin never thought he'd be here 7 months later. He thought this thing was going to be over in, 5 days.
Right. And so we've seen, that the Russians, that Putin has called for a partial mobilization. They've called up just about every I don't want to say able-bodied man. It appears that every able-bodied man.
Every name in the phone book.
Right, but the able-bodied men are making for Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, wherever the hell they can get out of, right? And it's left with the sort of beer-bellied, guys who, from Central Asia, who don't want anything to do with this. They're going into battle untrained with, not the right weapons. I mean, these guys are literally just cannon fodder.
And they've been told that. There was at one induction, so I mean, there aren't even induction centers. At one camp where they just gathered these guys, an officer said, "You're meat, you're fodder," and apparently the response to that was that they beat the crap out of him, out of some lieutenant colonel who was stupid enough to say it out loud, thinking he was going to push around all these recruits. When you've got a bunch of scared young men, gathered in one place, and you walk in and say you're all dead men. Then you're gonna have a problem on your hand. I also realized I just made a joke about a phone book, which I guess almost nobody under 40 is going to get.
It's all right. I still leave my name. I still leave my name, the date I called, and the time I called on voicemails, because I start with voicemails, Tom.
It's Thursday, But this mobilization, I mean, this is yet another one of many self-inflicted wounds, right, that Putin's been bringing on to himself, his own regime. He started this war under a series of delusions far worse even than the will be greeted as liberators delusions that the Americans had about Iraq. This is, he had no idea what he was wandering into. He is now bogged down, and he has lost huge. We still can't put our exact number on it, but a huge amount of his military has been just chewed to pieces already in 7 months. I mean, far beyond what other countries have lost, far beyond what the United States lost in 20 years fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right.
And then he calls up a mobilization. And this is important to understand because it broke the political deal he had with the Russian people. The deal he had with the Russian people is, you can watch this on TV and I'll bring home, we'll do flags and parades, and, all of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine will be Russian citizens, and the empire will be back, and it'll kind of look like the old Soviet Union. And there's going to be, it's going to be, what's that line in Goodfellas? It'll be like when you were first married. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be great.
Right.
And the whole thing fell apart. But the deal was, but none of this will touch you back home. That's the deal he's broken now. People are getting pulled out of their homes, they're being pulled out of school, they're being pulled out of their workplaces, and they're basically being told, go over here, bring a sleeping bag. They don't even have their own equipment.
Right.
Bring a sleeping bag and some food, and we'll tell you when it's time to go get killed.
And now, let me ask a silly question. Does the average Russian guy have a sleeping bag?
No. And they're going to have to steal one or bring blankets or something. And by the way, that's in case anybody thought I was popping a beer.
Well,
for lunch
at this point.
But one thing to understand about the Russian system, if you've ever served or been around the U.S. military, you join the military, you get your orders to go to a place where you go with a whole bunch of new recruits.
Right.
They train you, they house you together, they put you through, 6 weeks of hell. You bond, you learn the basics of
there's an esprit de corps.
Say again?
Esprit de corps. Like you learn.
Right, but you also just learn the basics: how to march in a straight line, how not to blow your own toe off with a gun, and so on. The Russian military does it differently. They say, go to your unit, and they'll, report to the commanders there, and they'll just get you up to speed and take care of you. Well, that would be like us saying, hey, you're going to deploy with 10th Mountain to Afghanistan. So here's a bus ticket. Go up to Fort Drum in New York and just show up, knock on the front door, and tell 10th Mountain. But that's how they do it.
Right. And
that's why this whole thing is a complete shit show, because they just have a really bad system for all this. They don't have they don't have a professionalized non-commissioned officer corps. They don't have like really, experienced sergeants and petty officers that can take care of the recruits. Their officers are, notoriously cruel and elitist and stay far away from the men. So, once again, Putin did the one thing that was guaranteed to piss everybody off, and for no clear strategic gain in Ukraine.
Right. Before we bring the conversation home, I want to ask a little bit about the saber rattling that Putin has done vis-a-vis nuclear weapons. President Biden last week said, that we're as close to Armageddon as we've been maybe since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I think was 1962. So we're talking 60 years. What is this like Putin's like trump card, so to speak?
I did a piece for folks who want to read about this in a little more length. I wrote a piece about this last week in The Atlantic about Biden's comments. The president just kind of, not a lot of internal filters on Biden. I think he's wrong that we're as close as we've been since 62. I do think we're as close as we've been since about 1983 or 1984, when there was this general, I was already a young guy studying, Soviet stuff and kind of getting my feet wet in the whole Soviet American thing. And there was really a sense in late 83 that war was becoming inevitable. for folks who weren't alive then or don't have the history of the Cold War at their fingertips. Ronald Reagan had announced SDI, the Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative thing that freaked out the Soviets. The Soviets shot down a Korean airliner, a civilian airliner with 269 people on it, blew them out of the sky. The United States overthrew a communist regime in Grenada, which started to convince the Soviets that this was Act One and that we were going to, we were getting ready to roll. There was a nuclear exercise that NATO conducted that now we think the Soviets might have taken a little too seriously. Not sure that it was an exercise. So I haven't been this concerned since the early 80s. I think Cuba was different because there was a forcing function. There was a moment, right, where those where the surface-to-air missiles that protect the nuclear missiles in Cuba were going to go hot, and then we were going to have to go to war to get them somehow. So we had there was a ticking time limit on Cuba. I think in that sense, the president got over his skis on the Cuba analogy, but I think I was glad, as I said in the piece, I'm glad that he's trying to rattle people out of their complacency, because I think a lot of Americans have gotten really used to the idea of saying, well, let's just get in there and kick ass. Well, it's not that simple. It's not. I think we're doing pretty well. And I think the president and NATO together have been handling this, been threading this needle of supporting Ukraine, upping the pain to the Russians without escalating this conflict to something that could get out of control. But I think it's on the president's mind, and it ought to be. Right. That's his job. That's the thing he should be worried about.
Well, that's the difference between having a president like Donald Trump or a president who's actually leader of the free world, right?
Well, and Trump, the nuclear, everything. I got to worry about the nuclear. He has no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he's just
right. Well,
I mean, it's not worth discussing the what was it David Brooks once said, that his thoughts are just random fireflies in a jar, sparking.
Right.
But with Putin, I think he's trying to play it both ways. He wants to get all the mileage he can get out of nuclear threats without having to use nuclear weapons yet, because nuclear weapons aren't going to buy him anything, and I think it would be the end of his regime. I think not just because of a nuclear conflict, but because the whole world would just turn on him. And I imagine at that point, I mean, I have really tried to tamp down talk about people offing Putin or carrying him out of his office or whatever. There might be people in Moscow who are going to say, I didn't sign up for that.
And what do you think about, what about the Chinese? Like, what do they do, right, in that? Because they're not really looking for Armageddon, I don't think.
No, and I think the Chinese have been watching this whole thing to say, how can you attack a small neighbor and get away with it? And whatever Putin's doing, that's not it.
Right.
The Chinese also have, you have to give some props. You don't have to hand it to them, but you have to almost grimly admire the way the Chinese use silence and ambiguity to stay out of these things.
Yeah.
But I wonder, if the Chinese, even the Chinese, who are, I always call them when I give talks about this stuff, I call them the masters of the abstention, right? Every time somebody goes to the United Nations, they say they're like New York in that old musical 1776. New York abstains courteously, And the Chinese just say, it's between y'all, we're staying out of it. I wonder if China would be able to stay out of it if someone actually explodes a nuclear weapon, in Eurasia. Right. I doubt it. But I don't think Putin's there yet. I think this Kerch Bridge, that we started with, that would have been an opportunity for him, I think, to escalate. And I think instead he's just going to, as I've said now for 4 or 5 months, I'm very worried about the nuclear issue, but I think that the Russian approach here is going to be to just kill civilians and engage in just mass murder as retaliation.
Right, which is something that Alex Vindman, who I have on the latest edition of the Lincoln Project podcast, had told us even before the invasion, which is if this doesn't go the way Putin wants it to, and it's not likely to, he's just going to kill as many people as he can. And unfortunately, Alex's prediction has come true. So let's zoom out of Eurasia, as you called it appropriately, and back into the United States. So I read a story that, for Putin, in 2016, right there was, and I read this actually. I interviewed Peter Baker and Susan Glasser for their new book, The Divider, which will be that podcast will be out this week. And Tom, one thing I didn't realize about the Russia investigation during Mueller was that Putin had gotten involved in American domestic politics not because of Trump, but because he was so upset with Hillary Clinton.
Oh yeah,
Going back to what he considered her, inviting protests in 2011, and then all of the sanctions in 2014 when he invaded Ukraine the first time. Trump he got sort of lucky with, right? But now that's become, the door that Trump allowed Putin to walk through as far as American domestic politics has now, blossomed into most of the Republican Party, at least its leadership, which is, J.D. Vance, I don't care what happens to Ukraine. I don't think anybody else does either. Matt Gaetz, there shouldn't be one more dollar for Ukraine. And then you see all the craziness, and I want to get into their rhetoric in a minute, but the real practical effect of this is that if Republicans are to take either house of Congress this November, that would seem to me to cut off aid to Ukraine, which is exactly the kind of thing that Putin would want.
Interesting, though, that most Republicans, rank and file Republicans, are like 3/4 of them are in favor of continuing to help Ukraine. What you're seeing here, and by the way, that is a great point in the Baker and Glasser book, and one people forget that Putin has held Hillary Clinton responsible for most of his troubles, going back to when he wanted to come back for a third term. I mean, he really thinks of her as the person that was trying to remove him from power, which shows you how little he really understands about American politics in general.
Right.
But I think what's happened with the Republicans is they are capering and cavorting and mugging for this tiny primary voter audience and donor class. It's amazing to me that the Republican Party has become this populist, pseudo-populist, theoretically populist uprising that in fact is driven by rich people and celebrities, by the most elite of the elites. It just astonishes me that the same people say, well, we're going to take our government back from, millionaires in South Florida. It's just astonishing how stupid they are about who's pulling their strings. And so when, Vance isn't talking to the people of Ohio. He doesn't care about them. He's looking at just motivating that very narrow base of voters who got him the nomination, who are going to send him more money, and who he's just hoping to keep motivated enough to outnumber kind of people who just don't care very much or aren't going to show up. But this, for us as former Republicans, the party of Reagan and G.H.W. Bush, man, to see this kind of, I'm going to embrace the Kremlin just to own the libs is so astonishing. For a while it was painful, and then it was nauseating, and now it's just kind of, mind blowing. And steal a line from Elvis Costello, I used to be disgusted and now I try to be amused. But this is apocalyptic stuff. I mean, this is, a major political party saying we will side with one of the worst regimes on earth, just so that we can, engage in the political equivalent of shit posting.
Right. But that's the whole ball game for them, right? Everything.
That's all there is. There is no policy here. I mean, this is the thing that I think, you and I and a lot of us have already talked about over the years, that the Republican Party has no policies. There is nothing there. There's no there.
Well, they tried, McCarthy tried a month ago to, this was a commitment to America, which, as you saw, flopped.
Nobody cared.
48 hours, and now they don't talk about it anymore.
Well, Vance tried this once with a town hall early in his campaign when he was running in the primaries, and he said, so I want to talk about, the air and opioids and, jobs and things important. And people were like, screw that. What do you think about what Tucker said on Fox? And of course it turned into this, crazy pants thing. And I think Vance and others have figured, okay, fine. If that's what it takes to get elected to the Senate, then, if if wearing the big nose and the funny glasses and jumping around and singing silly songs is how I become a senator, then I'll do whatever I have to do. I mean, Kari Lake has learned that lesson.
Right.
Do whatever it takes.
Fits, right?
Pardon?
If the fur hat fits.
Yeah. I mean, whatever it takes. And I think there's no sense of consequences. There's no sense that taking political positions has real world impact on the security of the United States, that it has real world impact on the lives of, innocent, ordinary people who just need, a job or clean water or to be able to buy a gallon of milk. They don't care about any of that. It's
just think about this. I don't think this is going to happen, but if the worst thing happened, Tom, think about this. You'd have Blake Masters, Adam Laxalt, Herschel Walker, Dr. Oz, J.D. Vance, just off the top of my head.
It's the Star Wars bar.
Yes, right.
It's the political equivalent of the Star Wars bar. It's a freak show. With utterly unserious human beings. And yes, the Democrats have some absolutely ridiculous people. Every party does. Mm-hmm. But this is the ridiculousness and the freak show quality. That's a feature, not a bug. Those are not people that have kind of slid in on the fringe. They're the base. They're the party leaders. I mean, Kari Lake could end up being a governor.
Yeah, and that worries me a lot. But let me talk about the freak show nature of this, because this past weekend, Trump did rallies in Nevada and Arizona, and Tom, to say that they were as unhinged as he's been is saying something. But I'm feeling like that's where we are. We had a senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, again another member of the Star Wars bar, go out there and say they want reparations for the people that caused the crimes. Now, who do you think he's talking about, Tom? Because, it's like we always use the old expression, the dog whistle, like, no, it's the bullhorn. Like, I mean, he came within half an inch of just saying the N-word 72 times.
I was just going to say, we're this close. And again, this is what I mean about policy. There are good arguments against reparations. I mean, I think, conservatives and independents, that's something that comes out of the far left of the Democratic Party. And there are probably a lot of Democrats who don't want to have that discussion. And it could end up, you could make it into a campaign point to say, look, I'm a centrist. I'm not a far left guy. I'm not a far right guy. Instead, Tuberville walks up and says, you know what I'm talking about. And everybody claps. And it's not even hidden. It's not even, it's a feature, not a bug. They're not talking about, they're not accidentally edging toward racism as opposition toward reparations. They're talking about reparations to deliver a racist, as you say, through a racist message through a bullhorn, through an air raid siren, to say this is where you belong. That you're our if you agree with me about this, you're our people.
No, look, and I said that I think when I was on Simone Sanders' show a couple of weekends ago. She's like, "What?" Because it was another one of the candidates had said something. I'm like, Simone, it's October, and it's October of an election year in America. For Republicans, it's time to scare the white people.
Somebody said this about the Mastriano campaign, that the appeal was people are tired of not being able to be terrible.
Right.
Like it's like this strain that, finally somebody says, no, let it out, be as terrible as you want to be. There is no longer a challenge in our politics to rise above, to be better, to be your better self, the better angels of your nature, because we've all said stupid things. We've all, had thoughts that are unworthy of us. The point of a good political movement is that it challenges us to come into the public sphere and to be better than our worst moment. And these are candidates who say, no, go with it. Let it, embrace the horror, baby. Just, embrace the suck.
I mean, but Tom, in some ways, it's also freeing for those folks that are into that, because, to be a member of society, and I'm not talking about polite society, just a society, means that you can't be as big an asshole as you want all the time, right? That you must curb your worst instincts, that when someone cuts you off in traffic, that, you shake your fist, but you don't pull out a 45, right?
Right.
I mean, in like, why, road rage is always, I'm sometimes guilty of it, but like, this is like, no, you get to take that person who's the worst of the worst when you're, somebody just cut you off, you had to slam on your brakes. Now you're going to be that, you get to be that person all day, every day to everybody.
You get to be that way, and it's bad for you. I mean, it's just it's I don't want to sound like a holistic healer here, but it just floods your body with stress chemicals. I thought of this on the nights because every now and then, as a good, first as a political scientist, when I was a practicing political scientist, and now as, I guess, a journalist, whatever I count as an opinion journalist, I watch Fox. I'll watch Fox for 3 or 4 hours just to kind of get that sense. And, it's just by the end of it, if you do that 3, 4, 5 nights a week, you are a raving, anger-addled lunatic by the end of a week with that stuff. And that's the point. And you can't live that way. That's not, as you say, you can't live in a society where, somebody bumps into you in line in the grocery store and you haul off an F-bomb or some racial invective. But this is, I think this is channeling some sense. And you and I have talked about this before, and I've written about this. I think for a lot of the people following these guys, their lives, they're looking for some sense of meaning in their lives.
Sure.
And they're looking for a crusade, and they're looking to feel like they're part of, this righteous army on the right hand of St. Michael and Jesus Christ. And these guys give them that. And they say, no, it's not you. These terrible things you think, they're perfectly normal, and they mean that you're right and that you're part of our club. And that is always a dangerous thing in a democratic society.
Well,
when enough people are feeling bored and empty and looking for a crusade, there's always going to be a demagogue to give them one.
Well, and I mean, that's the sort of the basis of QAnon, right? You look at the Proud Boys, right? Who, it's this fraternal drinking club, fighting club, but it's mostly very lonely guys. Tom, somebody said, well, it's all these young guys who, got no economic opportunity. And I said, no, it's not. It's like
the leader of the Stuart Rhodes has a law degree from Yale.
Right.
I mean, when can we cut that shit out finally?
Right.
And
it's not just us saying that. I mean, there's we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Robert Pape out at the University of Chicago, like, he's been doing research on this since basically since January 6th, and he said the red warning flag of extremism, Tom, is not the guy in the hollow in eastern Kentucky. It's the middle-aged white guy with a family in the suburbs who's got a degree and a real job.
The January 6th. And I think it's one of the, best things Bob could have done, Bob Pape could have done, is he did the simple thing and said, well, let's see if the conventional wisdom is true, and let's just go through all the arrest records and all the booking records and see what these people do for a living. I'm sorry, but this was not a revolt of the underclass and the frustrated and the jobless and the people in the dying towns. It's a bunch of freaking chiropractors and real estate agents.
Right.
Who all thought that they were going, and this is the thing I think that really bears repeating when you see those tapes. They thought they were going to a seditionist day camp. They thought they were going to an outing, and that when it was all over, they were going to get on the buses and they were going to go back to the hotel, and they were all going to get loaded and tell great stories and post on Instagram. And all of a sudden, they're like, the FBI is here? I'm under arrest? How can that be? I was just having fun. Well, it shows you what a completely unserious society we've become. And that myth of, this economic underclass that's being crushed by globalization, that myth has been pernicious, and it's something that's been pushed by both the right and the left. And it's just wrong. I mean, empirically, it's just wrong. It's not a matter of argument. It's like, there is no data for it. It's just a belief that makes us feel better.
Right. And well, yeah, because it allows Republicans and Trump to drape themselves in the everyman, and it allows Democrats to look down their face at, people from the country.
And to say there's a solution, if only for the Democrats, is to say, well, if there was more jobs and high-speed internet, in these areas, we could. and for the Republicans to say, if we could stop, China from whatever it is China does,
right?
But it's not the problem. And this is, I think, why people shy away from the truth on this. The real problem is a problem of character. It's a problem of moral poverty and American decline. And nobody on the right or the left really wants to say, I've come to the conclusion where I've just turned and, said, maybe these are just, bad people. Maybe this is just a character defect. Yes, there are people who were pulled into it. They fell down the internet rabbit holes. Some of them, I think, especially with some of the really extreme, middle-aged ladies going nuts on QAnon, some of them deserve our empathy. But by and large, these are people who know what they're doing. And I think the January 6th committee, having some of those folks come forward, there was, who am I thinking of, Reed? The young guy, he was arrested.
From Ohio?
Pardon?
The guy from Ohio. Yeah,
came with his girlfriend or his wife and said, well, I was an idiot. What was I thinking? I know I did this, this is crazy. But unfortunately, I think most of these people are not going to have that moment of clarity. And they even think that some of them think their court appearances are kind of a lark, like, look at me. Hey, I'm going to film my court appearance. The real estate agent. Oh, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to lose weight. This is
right. But it's not. You're not going to come out better for it.
Well, right? It's like a nation of children, of very dangerous children.
Right. Well, Tom, where can our viewers find your work at The Atlantic?
I'm the lead writer on the Daily. So if you come to The Atlantic, come to our newsletters, sign up for the Daily. You'll get stuff from me at least 2-3 times a week. Of course, subscribe to The Atlantic so you can get all the content there. Right. Put in a pitch for my for my home team, and you can also find me on Twitter, of course, where I'm
infamous,
a little bit combative on occasion, but be patient with me. It's a big social media environment.
Right.
But I'm a staff writer at The Atlantic, so if you come to The Atlantic, there's plenty of stuff by me there.
All right, perfect. And as always, gang, I want to remind you, tune into our podcast, the Lincoln Project podcast, Joe Trippi's podcast, That Trippy Show, LPTV, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Should have special coverage this week on the January 6th hearing that will be happening, I believe, on Thursday midday. Always remember, guys, we're having town halls every week between now and the election. Join the union.us. Make sure you're registered to vote. If you can already cast your ballot, cast that ballot. Get it in now. Make sure that your friends, your family, everybody you know, casting that ballot from top to bottom. And if you're a Republican, listen, I'm talking to the Republicans here for a second. If you can vote, if you're sick of your party, and I get it, like Tom and I have been there, right? We've tread this trail before you, right? And you can vote for a Josh Shapiro, right? Vote for Josh Shapiro. If you can't vote for a Democrat, skip that line altogether. Don't give Mastriano the vote. Don't give Kerry Lake the vote. Don't give Joe Lombardo or Michaels or Vance or any of them a vote, right? They don't deserve it. The country is better than this. We need to show them that. Everybody, thanks again. We'll see you later in the week. And until then, I want to say thanks to Tom, and we're going to leave you with a spot on Ukraine that we dropped, I think, late last week. Everybody have a great week.
When Vladimir Putin invaded a peaceful Ukraine, his brutal shock troops committed hideous war crimes against women, children, and the elderly. He bombed cities, towns, and villages. America and the world gave Ukraine weapons, supplies, and intelligence. The Ukrainians put their courageous soldiers in the line of fire. With great sacrifice, this alliance broke the invasion, pushed it back, liberated millions. Victory for Ukraine is in sight, but the war isn't over. And the new front is in Washington, where MAGA Republicans want a Putin victory. They'll cut off aid to Ukraine if they take power. You heard that right. They want America to switch sides, help Putin win, threatening us with nuclear annihilation. It's sick. It's wrong. It's MAGA. If they win in November, Putin wins, and the blood will be on our hands.
The Lincoln Project paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising.